Well, thank you for coming to another Marketing Monday. I'm Justin Levy. I'm the Director of Social and Influencer Marketing at Demandbase, and I am joined today by someone that I think everyone on LinkedIn knows by now. But how are you, Arthur? Do you want to give people kind of the who you are, what you do type bit?
Yes, of course. So hey, everybody, Arthur Castillo here. I have a crazy title at Chili Piper. It is Head of Dark Social and Evangelism. Now, I came about through sales. So I actually, when I first started off at Chili Piper, I was an AE there, had a ton of success, and my marketing team saw what I was doing outside of the sales stuff in terms of being involved in communities and starting my LinkedIn journey and having a presence there. And they thought I would have more success being a marketer than a sales rep. And I guess I agreed with them. I switched to the dark side. So have been in field marketing, and now recently am exploring this title because of what we kind of saw the past couple of years in terms of how people were buying is changing. So yeah, super excited for the conversation. And I don't know if I'm at that level yet on LinkedIn, but thank you for the kind words.
Now, one of the things I think is confusing for a lot of people, right? Is this topic of dark social, because you see it named 1,000 different things. We tend to rotate it towards dark social being the name, but when you think about it, it's in your title, and I know this is newer for you, but how do you internalize that? Do you see it as only private communities? Do you see it as that and something else? Like at Chili Piper, how are you guys thinking of what dark social is?
Yeah. Yeah, I think to your point, and I kind of talked about this earlier of like dark social is becoming a buzzword. The way I think about it, the way Chili Piper thinks about it is, I think something I realized even in selling, where now with the rise of communities and even how we use platforms like LinkedIn, like 5 years ago, it probably was a digital resume still. And now I get to message somebody else in my title and say, hey, I'm coming across this challenge. How the heck did you solve it? And then hear directly from a peer how they went about and did it. So we saw that peers were, and with the maturity of the internet and the access to it, you now have daily access to your peers, where oftentimes it might have only happened several times throughout the year at these annual conferences where you're in the midst of your peers, you can discuss this. So that alone, at the scale that it's happening, sales, I think this is what I started to see, where sales was less influential on the buyer's journey. And I see sales becoming more guiding people to buy your product and getting that whole buying committee on board, because that's increasing as well. I know Challenger came out with, when they released their book, it was something like 5 or 6 decision makers for each sale. And now that's continuing to increase. So back to your question in terms of how we think of dark social, a lot of it is, okay, we see that the way people are buying is changing. They have communities, like you mentioned, private communities, but also in how they're using social media. And I think because of that, that's also gone on to text and phone. So it's really scaled word of mouth combined with the maturity of the internet, that now we have daily access to our peers, and our peers are now the #1 trusted resource when it comes to anything when you're purchasing a product or service. So gone are the days, I think, when you can really cold call and persuade and influence somebody on the phone and say, hey, this is something that I need yesterday. At best, I think what they'll do is, oh yeah, I'm familiar with your brand, and they might be open to that conversation. So when we think of dark social, it's a lot of the buying journey happens outside of where marketing attribution can tell you it originated from. A lot of the time it's direct or organic traffic, but we know, I mean, me and you can name drop something on this LinkedIn Live now, a tool. Somebody might go search it. They might ask their peers and eventually request a demo. What is that going to tell them? Oh, they came in through organic or direct traffic. But really, there's a whole variety of actions that buyers are taking before they actually even engage with your sales team. That's what we define as dark social. And that basically is scaled word of mouth, thanks to the maturity of the internet.
Now, one of the things you touched on is the difficulty to measure this, right? Which can make it hard for a marketer, or make it hard to even sell within a business, right? Now, you and I both came into the positions, right? It was something that we were asked to take on, or things of that nature. But as someone that identifies this, maybe they're part of these communities, and now they've observed the need for their business to get involved, to go to your CMO or your VP, or depending on how big or small your company is, and say, hey, we should be part of Dark Social. You can't say, hey, this is going to deliver X amount of money in pipeline, right? It's hard to do that. So within your team, how has that conversation been?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is the crux of where a lot of marketing stops. And I think you have to go back to the history of how we even got to this point, where a lot of the time marketing's job was basically to be sales aid, and anything they needed, they would create, whether it's a PowerPoint or landing page or anything like that. Eventually it became so transactional, and because we wanted to measure everything, the impact of the marketing, it became very direct response. So I think that's where marketing is at today in B2B, very direct response. Hey, get a demo. I think the smart companies are still taking this approach to educate and know that the buyer journey isn't linear. And a lot of the biggest impact on that buyer's journey will often be through channels that you can't necessarily own, but you can influence. So what I mean by that is your customers. How are you creating an environment for them to actually speak out on your behalf? And we do that in a variety of ways. We do have a partner program, but we also invite them to our executive dinners. And we saw with this trend of like communities and how peers, having access to these peers and how valuable it was, we knew eventually it was going to come back to in person after the pandemic slowed down. So just giving them access to this, I guess, not to go off on a tangent down that way, but in terms of attribution, I think there's like, the way I look at it, each department actually has, it's not only marketing's problem or challenge. I think each department can contribute to this, because we have to start thinking more in ways of like team revenue. So not just, hey, that's marketing responsibility or sales responsibility or even CS's responsibility. How do we start looking at it through a revenue lens so that you can actually have kind of touch points or checkpoints, gates and bounds of trying to understand where the demand was actually created. So let me give you an example. I think marketing, the best example that we have taken from Chris Walker and his team at Refine Labs, is the self-reported attribution. Having a required free text field, not a drop-down, because then people will just select whatever, on your demo request page saying, how'd you hear about us? And they're required to say that. So a lot of the time when you implement that, you will start to see Dark Social take its effect, because people will say, hey, I saw you on LinkedIn, or hey, a peer recommended you, or I saw you mentioned in this community. That's when you can actually start to see, right at the point of them engaging with your brand, where maybe that demand was created, and Dark Social is really at play, and what got them to go from, yeah, this is fine, to, hey, I think we should explore your product or service. Then comes the sales touch point. And I know this one's tough. How we have it here at Chili Piper is, it is a required field as reps update their pipeline in terms of what prompted them to request a demo. And we have done training to get sales reps to ask that at the beginning of the call, so that we have another layer. And then finally at CS, I think this is where maybe people like me and you, Justin, will get more involved, is early on within that customer journey, finding a feedback loop to understand their buying journey. So I'm talking like 30, 45, 60 days within the purchase, to really ask them those top of mind, hard pressing questions of, where were they at? What actually created demand? What paths did they take? What problem were they trying to solve? What can they do now that they weren't able to do? all of those things coming directly from your customer, that I think is your copywriting. And the reason I put this across the entire revenue org, I think having those checks and balance, you can actually then measure against each other. So early on marketing, you have that, how did you hear about us? Great. They're forced to type something in there. Maybe sales uses that as a discussion point and saying, hey, I saw you heard about us on Justin Levy's LinkedIn Live. Talk to me about that. Was that the episode with Arthur where he talked about Dark Social, or right? So it actually can even be used as a place to start that sales discussion. And then I think CS, because especially in software, people are constantly buying your product. And if they don't get value within the year, guess what? They're probably not renewing. So how are you taking what you're learning from your customers, putting that back into your marketing, also trying to share those customer stories in public channels or private Slack communities so that it's actually coming from them rather than your own? Long-winded way, Justin, of saying three gates in place. You have the marketing self-reported attribution. You have sales asking, and we've made it a required field for them to update the op. And then you have a CS, once they are your customers, getting those active insights around their buying process so you can incorporate that back into your message.
I think that was great. And I just want to remind anyone on the LinkedIn Live, please ask us questions so that we don't have to talk to ourselves for 45 minutes straight. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned the required free-form link, because in a bit of a way, I'm a little bit of a curmudgeon against that. And
yeah,
and I understand it, and I agree with it at a basic level, right? To what you're saying, to what Chris has said, and I get it, right? Especially for a smaller company. How did you hear about us, Justin or Arthur, or Rev Genius, or what have you, right? Having the free form. The thing that I contend with in my head, or where it's hard for me to wrap my head around it, is in a fast-growing company, even say, demand-based, we're 1,000-person company. I've worked for companies that are 10, 12,000 plus people. Is that's not scalable at some point. You do hit a brick wall eventually, right? You could work with sales ops or someone to run some custom reporting in Salesforce, if you use Salesforce, so that you could pull it to see that Arthur drove this much and Justin, but you would end up with, say, 700 people in a big company that you need those reports for, right? Whereas we don't have, the only thing that besides that, obviously you can see that, a friend of ours, Nick Bennett's really good at that. He knows how much he will contribute to pipeline this year and his goals for next year. One thing that I use is custom codes and obviously relying on UTMs, and I'll use UTMs per community, right? And I'm part of dozens of them, and or custom codes. So at Demand Base, we have some certifications that you can take that are not non-demand based specific, right? It's not take this training and learn about the demand-based tool. It's take this to up-level your career. So I'll create those and share those because it's easy tracking at that point. I can see that, I gave you a custom code and you got 100 people to take it type thing. But I'm curious if you see where my issue lies with freeform text, or if I'm just basically crazy thinking that it doesn't scale well.
Yeah. I mean, even that question, like, doesn't scale well. In this, are we trying to scale like attribution? Because I don't know if we're getting to the right point. I see what you're saying. And I know Chris Walker and their team, they use HubSpot and they have a way of categorizing based on what's mentioned. So if it's like podcast or LinkedIn, I think they even categorize that under Dark Social or community. So they have a couple keywords that they know how to. So I'm sure there's a way to in terms of that issue. But I think with marketing, this is I think we are at a crossroads where we're starting to see a little bit of a switch from the quantitative to the qualitative. And I think marketers are still obsessed with their numbers, and rightfully so in certain cases, right? But I think there's no opportunity or measure for the qualitative. And that's where I think a lot of what we're doing kind of supplements maybe more marketing ops in the quantitative, where we're trying to read in between the lines and actually get qualitative feedback to complement our quantitative measures. So I hear you. I think there's ways to kind of custom quote and quantify that, but I think there can still be a piece of your marketing team that's kind of looking at the quantitative numbers and then having somebody else kind of dig into those to look at the qualitative insights to lead you and say, hey, is this resonating? So that's where I'd probably push back on the scalability of dark social, where I think you're actually achieving what you want to do if you're doing stuff that is unscalable, because I think it really focuses on the qualitative piece where you're actually engaging with your customers and going a layer deeper outside of maybe what they wrote in that free form text field to understand a little bit more where the demand was created. So then you can kind of go down and replicate it. So I think you can see enough signals, Justin, even in the quantitative, if there's problems there, where you can at least see, hey, podcast, LinkedIn, community stuff, it's actually leading to something. We don't have to eliminate it right away. So yeah, that's how I think about it.
And I think it brings up a great point in that we're in this time where it's so early on of sorts. They're not new, but the pandemic contributed to the kind of up and to the right focus on dark social, right? And that we're in a time where you can have debates like this, where it's not firm, right? There's not like, you have to do it this way or else you don't know what you're doing, right? You're doing it wrong if you're doing it this way. And so that's, I think, one of the things that's exciting about this period of time. But, you mentioned podcasts, and, we have on our content team where I report up through a podcast team, and we can tell you, and we have a whole method for being able to know how much pipeline they generate in a quarter. And it's, for a whole different conversation, but there is a method to the madness of how they outreach, how that puts them into a certain track, how the reps follow up, so there is pieces of that you can take away, but I wholeheartedly agree on the qualitative piece, right? There is a bit of this where marketers have to start to let go of the fact to quantify that this brought in 2% or there was a conversion of this, and it's still needed, right? But I think, and I'd love to hear if you're doing anything like this, but we're doing a lot with our customer champions and with our customer marketing team, and I'm happy to explain how we're exactly doing that. But I haven't moved to a point where I'm trying to measure, say, sales that have come from that or meetings booked or what have you. But I can tell you exactly how many customers have commented on our behalf in private channels.
Okay.
But that's not quantitative. It's quantitative in as much as I know that it's 15 or 20 or 100 customers, but I don't know how much that may have contributed to pipeline right now, right? It's the qualitativeness of knowing that we've activated our customers, they're champions, so they're in the communities on our behalf in questions that it's not demand-based raising their hand and saying, yeah, our competitors say this, or yeah, we think this is great and we're the reason why you should go buy, right? So are you working on kind of customer champion programs or activating your customers to be your voice in these communities?
Yes. Yeah. And I'd be curious to hear how you're doing it too, Justin. But yeah, I think like when it comes to dark social and peers now being the number one trusted resource, to me, and I think this has always been the case, but even more so now, your customers are your best sales reps. So how, if they have the credibility to speak with one of their peers who, like in our case, I know we have several use cases, but let's say they're talking to director of demand gen, literally to the point where they can influence them and say, hey, if you use demand base like or chili piper, that won't even be an issue because I haven't even thought about that for the past 6 months. And not only that, we've actually increased our inbound conversion rates. That's influential enough for them to go and check out a demo of both, of like, okay, you already sold me. Like, I clearly need to be educated on what the heck these two do, because somebody else in my role is saying, oh, their role's a breeze now because they have these two pieces of tech. So for sure, your customers are your best sales reps. Because I came from like the field marketing side early on in marketing, I think a lot of the dark social that we do, the dark social events, whatever you want to call them, that we do is through a field marketing lens. And I got to see this happen in person. It was fantastic, where going back to, okay, we know dark social, we know buyers are speaking to each other, they're going back to their peers. We're trying to think, how do we reverse engineer that to create environments where maybe our best customers are talking to our best prospects? And that's exactly what we did. So we've doubled down on these executive dinners, 20 to 30 people. We kind of settle in on an ICP. Let's say if me and you, we were doing one together with demand base, it'd be directors of demand gen, VPs of marketing, CMOs. And then really where the magic happens is we look at, okay, what customers are inviting, but which ones are our top prospects? And then actually making it happen in terms of the seating arrangement. Sit your best customers next to your best prospects. And I had the chance of seeing this happen 3 times right in front of me, where the one was my favorite because it was literally a deal that was stuck in a rep's pipeline. He messaged me and he's like, I don't know what to do about it. He's like, I saw there is an upcoming dinner in San Francisco. Should I invite somebody from that account over? I said, yeah, why not? Why not see if that helps unstick it? Then I saw one of our champions talk to him, and she explained it in 2 sentences in ways that I never could, because lo and behold, she's actually implemented it and seen the results. And he was like, oh, yeah, that sounds like a no-brainer. I'm surprised we're not doing that now. We need chili piper. And I think a month later, the deal closed. So yeah, absolutely. Like, leverage your customers. They are your best sales reps, and they can speak a language that oftentimes sales and marketing can't, because we haven't necessarily done the job of that person or implemented the tool and tech ourselves, where our customers have. So how are you leveraging that? I think it's a huge focus of mine right now. And I think like that is a big intersection of dark social and evangelism. And we can talk about evangelism in a sec here, but I think the best evangelists are your happy customers that have solved the business problem that you solve for prospects. So how do you create environments where they can meet your best prospects and speak on their behalf the results they've seen, create content with them, hopefully have them share it to their social network, because that means way more than if I were to share it through Chili Piper's company channel or even my own. And then that last one you mentioned there, which I'm curious, and maybe you can share some examples on your end, Justin. How are they now sharing it within these communities that they're a part of? I know some are pretty strict in terms of like any vendor mentions or anything like that, but I think there's still discussions being had and people are asking questions. So yeah, that's the next stage of how I'm thinking about this in my role specifically. Is we've identified these champions. We have these in-person executive dinners that we can consistently invite them to. We're starting to create content with them, but now how do we kind of continue to leverage that more and have them maybe post it in a community and say, hey, this is something that was pretty cool that we did with Chili Piper Demand Base. Would love to hear what other fellow marketers think about this. So all in all, yes, it's a huge focus of our customer marketing team and me in this role of dark social and evangelism.
Yeah, on our team and what we're doing here. So I have, besides just myself being involved in these communities, I also have someone on my team that monitors them, right? And has the Slack monitoring notification set up and things of that nature. And we're looking for mentions of the brand, competitor mentions,
Yeah.
and mentions around the topics that we cover, right? And or that we provide products and solutions for. And when we come across a thread, we'll provide it to our customer team, our customer marketing team. And we have a number of customer champions that we work with, as well as our customer community. And we'll go both ways. We'll post it in the community, see if anyone wants to take it and run with it. And then also a few of our champions that just have become very accustomed to being active in these communities. We'll talk to them and see if they're willing to go post an answer. And you'll see a lot. I mean, we've had it happen probably over 100 times in Q3 where we found these threads and they go have these conversations in them. And I had a similar thing that happened as you had at the executive dinner, but we had given a thread, a customer had jumped in to a thread, and it was, someone curious about the differences between us and a few competitors. And some other people had already responded, oh, we use demand base, we use this part of demand base, whatever. And then some other customers jumped in and had this conversation. I got almost an immediate Slack from one of our AEs, said, this woman came and booked a meeting finally. We've been trying to get them on the hook for a while, and it just kind of played phone tag or was never a good time budget-wise or what have you, but we booked a meeting. And I asked him, how could he tell? Like, was it just kind of circumstance? We were over here doing this, and so happened that she decided to book this meeting. He said, no, she mentioned that she had seen all these customers given essentially testimonials within here. So that's one of the things we're continually trying to scale. And actually for us, it's one of our OKRs. So it's one of our quarterly goals of trying to identify threads that we can work with customers to reply on our behalf. Now, you brought up evangelism, and I know that's another core part of your role. So it's a two-parter question, and you can tackle it however you want. One, the term evangelist or head of evangelism has become a pretty popular thing, I feel, as of late. You're seeing a lot of people get this title or try to figure out this title and this role. So I'd just be curious, what it means to you as well as to Chili Piper. How do you internalize it, and how is Chili Piper looking at it? But then how do you see the intersection of that with Dark Social? So you're responsible for both, so kind of break out the evangelist part by itself, but then how does that intersection work for you and for Chili Piper?
Yeah. Love this question. And I think they do. And I'm going to touch on what you just mentioned too, because I think evangelism to me is, and I think I realized I was doing this at other roles through a sales lens, where I felt that until somebody could contextualize the problem you solve, your pitch was not going to resonate. So to me, it was more about how do we get out into the market the problems that we are trying to solve and what exists with the status quo to get people to think differently. So I think it's more, evangelism to me is putting out a message to your market that would resonate with the problems you solve versus the product you pitch. Now, I think I'll go through ways, I guess, how I'm thinking about evangelism in 3 specific ways. So the first is myself, and you're probably thinking about this as well in terms of, okay, what if we're educating the market at scale around the problems Demandbase or Chili Piper solves? How am I doing that from an individual creator perspective that, 1, resonates with my target market, but 2, is maybe shareable, and it's actually like getting them to think a little bit differently from the status quo. So that's one hand. On the other hand, when I pitched this role internally, I also saw the opportunity for founder evangelism. So I think this is going to become more and more important. I know Dave Gerhardt just wrote a book about this, Founder Brand. But I don't think this is going to be a question of, oh, I'm too busy for this, I can't do it. I think it's going to be a huge way of how startups, especially in B2B tech, actually go to market through their founders and having them evangelize and having them appear where people are consuming content, which is more and more natively within the social media platform. And then the third is mini evangelists throughout the company. I guess I'm thinking about a fourth because I'm looking at it specifically through internal. So many evangelists throughout the company. I know Nick Bennett talks about this quite a bit. He's had major impacts to Alice's pipeline and revenue and people coming inbound, but he talks about, okay, I know I've had these results. What if we spread that across 20, 30, 50 employees at essentially a zero cost because it's organic outside of time? What could that have in terms of the impact on the brand message, bringing people inbound, having your whole company aligned to, hey, this is the problem we solve. So that's the original 3. The fourth I'd add, Justin, is kind of your customers, the one we've been talking about. They are your evangelists specifically for their persona, right? And especially the ones that it seems that you've been able to identify within these communities. I feel like there's champions that a lot of companies don't even recognize, that they're like fighting your internal battles within these communities and being like, well, I tried that, but this is why I like this tool better. So identifying them, and I like what you did kind of within your specific communities. I would even take it a step further and like set expectations and say, hey, by the way, we've kind of seen you talk about Demandbase and some of these Slack communities, and you're always one of the first to respond. We'd love to label you as whatever Demandbase champion. We call them Chili champions, and try and get them into a Chili champion program where we can actually kind of incentivize them, maybe give a bit of revenue share. But we recognize that they're already doing this on their own behalf. How do we kind of light fuel on that fire and give them more of an opportunity, an environment, a partner program to take advantage of the time that they're already putting in on your behalf to talk about why their experience was superior with your product versus a competition. So, okay, first part question, term evangelist, how do I look at it? 1, through myself, the problem we're solving. 2, founder evangelism. 3, mini evangelists throughout your company. And then 4, customers. So that's how I would kind of break it down. And I think the intersection of Dark Social is really that, what we've just been talking about and what you and your team have been able to do, which is identifying those champions. But how do we create that environment where they feel empowered? Maybe they have the resources. Maybe there's a bunch of links that they always share. You would like them to share that they can just have that handy and say, oh yeah, anytime I see this topic, I can paste this link and say, this resource has been awesome for me. So that to me is that intersection of Dark Social. I think evangelism kind of starts off with maybe the message around the problem you solve and getting that into the market, and then kind of taking those 4 different subsets of people, your actual evangelist, your customers, your founders, and then other employees throughout. Now I'm thinking of a 5th one, paid influencers. So it just keeps getting better. And then Dark Social, which is, okay, you kind of have this problem. How are now your champions or your mini evangelists, whatever you call them, sending that message back out into the market where it's coming off credible because it's through them versus you, the company, saying how awesome we are and how we've solved these problems. So that to me is how I look at the intersection of evangelism and Dark Social, of trying to talk about the problems we solve and then using your champions to distribute it throughout these dark social channels, whether it's LinkedIn, private Slack communities, maybe they have a meetup group with other directors of demand gen, whatever it is, and empowering them to share that message.
No, I think that's great. And it is a 360 view, right? I know that the purposes of today is kind of focus on dark social, right? In that intersection. But evangelism as a whole has to involve all of those kind of stakeholders in a 360. You know, I am a big fan of what co-founder, co-CEO, and now your interim CMO, what Alina does, right? Like, yeah. I'm a big fan of the content that she creates because it's not just a spigot for what the company's doing. It's not just share whatever this thing is from the company, right? You know, with no emotion behind it. Like, yeah, the stuff she posts is more personal about what she goes through and how she sees the world and the difficulties that she goes through in her position. And then she also does, you know, obviously other things, being proud of the team or here's some good things we've accomplished. But I think more people could model after that, more senior executives, co-founders, CEOs, other C-suite, because too often from that role, you see them more detached. It's if they're active, it's kind of kept out in arm's length, right? And so I think what Alina did is doing is great. She actually provided a quote for us for an ebook we're working on. So
I love that.
That's fantastic. Now, when you look at scaling this, so you bring up employees, right?
Yeah.
When you look at scaling this dark social, I mean, across the company. Now, we know for a fact, and I'm sure you do as well, I know that other people are involved in these communities. Now, how do I know that? I know just simply because they'll send me screenshots of, hey, do we have anyone that's answering this, or did you see this or something? We've our CEOs involved in some of them, and things like that. Some of the CEO specific type communities or what have you. But there's no like central versus decentralized perspective on this, I guess, right? Because there's no way you are going to say control, and that's probably too strong of a word, but all the employees across the company that may be part of it, you can help them evangelize. I think you can help provide the training and the resources and be that partner that will answer questions for them at any time. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, at least for me, I can only control so much of this, even though it's my responsibility for the company, right? Outside of what I do on a day-to-day basis in these communities, all I can do is provide help within the rest of the company. What they choose to do is what they choose to do. So how do you consider that? Is it a similar way, or are you thinking are you approaching it differently at Chili Piper?
I think I'm pretty fortuitous in that what I've realized is it's become a virtuous cycle for us over time. So I think for those brands listening about just dipping their toes in this, I'll tell you, even when I joined Chili Piper 2 years ago, how I was familiar with it was through a guy named Michael Tuso. I don't know if that name rings a bell, but he had developed a pretty strong social following. I think maybe now he's at like 40 or 50K followers. I knew he worked for Chili Piper. He didn't necessarily mention it too much, but it still got me aware of the company to the point where like I saw what he was doing, and it was giving me this impression over time of like, hey, my next company, I want somebody that's really focused on like coaching and development. And I saw that through Michael Tuso and Chili Piper. Now, over time, what's funny is it came from a top down. I saw like clearly it worked on me, and I saw the way people were buying was changing. And I think I'm speaking from a sales rep's perspective, but I think other creatively inclined sales reps have been seeing this too, and they're kind of wanting to jump on the train and create content on LinkedIn or wherever their buyers are. Over time, what's happened is we're now bringing in basically the ideal candidates because they're seeing what we're doing outside as they're scrolling their LinkedIn and saying, huh, it seems like Chili Piper really supports their employees and they're really open to creating their brand. And oh, wow, they're on TikTok and they're one of the first B2B brands here. So I think even from the top down and people from the outside viewing what we're doing, it's already bringing in the right types of candidates saying, hey, what's the, like, I want to start posting and like saying this message. Now, I think when they get here, what they come to realize is it really is about almost like a one-to-one. I know some reps will book some time with me and say, hey, like, I really want to like bolster my LinkedIn presence. So I think we're attracting the right type of personnel, but this wouldn't have happened if it didn't come from the top down and how it was celebrated throughout the company. I think that's the first step. So once that started to happen, then employees internally started seeing, hey, this is actually being valued. Hey, oh, wow, it's actually bringing in pipeline and revenue. Let's join in on that. And now we're bringing in the right types of candidates. But even before that, I think Chili Piper does a really good job. We call them social amplification Thursdays. So typically there's maybe a piece of content or an upcoming event or something, or maybe we got recognized for an award that we're really proud of, where we actually go ahead and kind of ghostwrite a couple of these posts, but we use them basically as a starting point for employees and say, almost like level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 1, hey, feel free to copy and paste this. Level 2, maybe put your own spin on it. Level 3, you can just take a concept and like tell a story about why it resonated with you. So it's almost like choose your own adventure and making it easy for them to say, hey, yeah, that's an easy post. I resonate with that, or giving their own spin on it. And now I don't know if I went on a fun tangent, Justin, but I'm forgetting the original question. Oh, how do we scale it, right? Throughout the company. So yeah. I'm getting there. So how I'm thinking about it is we're getting the right types of people in that want to lean into this. I think that's often a tough issue for some companies where they say, hey, seems to be the flavor of the month, or we want to lean into this, but nobody in their company is willing to do it. That's pretty tough. So that's why I think it has to start top down. And it does have kind of that snowball effect of other people within your company will start to post. I think once you have that, that's when you can start thinking about scaling this. So how I'm thinking about it, and another Justin Welsh has, he's a fantastic LinkedIn creator. He has some great playbooks. And one thing I really learned from his stuff is you're always an expert to someone. And this was really interesting, where he was talking about how you should write content 1 to 2 years to the person you were 1 to 2 years ago, because maybe you're just an SDR looking to break into tech. Well, you did that 2 years ago. So now you can document your journey, or maybe even sooner than that. You did that 6 months ago, and you can say, hey, these are all the steps I took, and other SDRs that want to break into tech don't go down this path. And now I'm an expert to these SDRs, but really I've just been an SDR for 6 months. So I think that's a really great mindset of looking back to the person you were 6 months, 1 year, 2 years ago. What problems did you come across, and maybe how did you solve them? Or what's somebody in your position 1 year ago? What can you teach them? So I think that's a great mindset to start shifting of, oh, I actually have something to share, because I think a lot of them say, hey, I want to contribute, but who am I to share? Like, I haven't done anything here. So I think looking back, that helps. And then in terms of scaling, that's something I'm going to be working on throughout the year, of basically creating a playbook that any customer facing, or any employee for that matter, that wants to build their brand, it's just a playbook. Because I think, one, if you start to look in the past of, hey, what problems have I solved 6 months, 1 year, 2 years ago, you'll start to have a good category of ideas that you can speak to. And then I think it just becomes about, how do I post this in different formats? Or I think just because you have like one message, it's repetition, but it's in different formats and maybe in creative ways. So that's the scaling piece that I'm looking at, basically giving them a playbook and saying, how do you look at yourself as an expert when you're looking back 1 to 2 years ago of where you are today? And then here's a playbook of how to actually outline and create and talk about the same thing, maybe 99 different ways.
Maybe we should partner on that ebook and we can provide it externally too, because I need to do, it's on my top strategies for next year as to create. So some questions were flown in, so we can kind of tackle those. So Danny asks, after we're around the attribution piece, how do you decide what groups to join and what role do you play in those groups? He asked this a little bit at the beginning, so I know we kind of covered a little bit, but yeah, when you're going through your evaluation, how do you evaluate the communities that you're going to spend your time in? And then I would kind of expand a little bit on Danny's question and say, what is your level of involvement, right? There's probably some you're super involved in and kind of tears down from there, right?
Yeah. So Danny, to answer your question, I think the way we did it was a very manual, throw a bunch of shit on the wall and see what sticks. We pretty much sponsored every community. So one, I was lucky to work with founders that believe in this dark social concept, understand that a lot of these buying conversations have in the community. So we were able to start sponsoring them. Over time, what we realized, and this is kind of what a little bit of what we were talking about, Justin, is understanding, okay, yeah, where your buyers live, but also on the community front, maybe how mutually beneficial that partnership can be. I think a lot of people are looking at community sponsorship as, how do I get the most revenue out of their membership? But I think how we've looked at it is, how can we share maybe what we're looking at that's not around Chili Piper, to actually educate the audience and put it in communities, and maybe create some events that will be beneficial for both parties. I think if I were to start again, Danny, what I'd do is, I hope you would know who buys your product or service right now. And I would just ask 10 to 20, 30, depending on your, each of them individually, and say, hey, what communities do you guys hang out in? And try and get that from customers or prospects, and just say, I'm trying to do some research. I'm pretty new to this. Can you let me know if you're part of any communities, and which ones you stay in the longest, and which ones drive more value? I would just do that across 20 people, and you'll start to see themes emerge of like, oh, these communities, they seem to all be a part of. And I think, like, yeah, once you go down that path, what was the other part of the question, Justin, where you talked about how do we identify that or something?
He had asked, how did you decide what groups to join and what role do you play in those groups? So I had kind of tacked on to that.
I see.
Just, I know for me, there's some I'm really involved with on a daily or even an hourly basis, and kind of tear down from there. But so yeah, to Danny's points, what role do you play?
Yeah, Danny, I think if I were to give you a framework, I think it's something like how engaged the actual community is. That's always nice to see which ones are actually driving up discussions. I think some, unfortunately, you can see that a lot of it is just pitch slapping and getting people to click on something. So seeing which ones are engaged, seeing, we were actually talking about this earlier, Justin, tracking keywords within Slack communities. I think that's great, whether it's your category, whether it's your competition, whether it's your own brand, to start to understand, hey, we're actually being mentioned quite a bit here. Funny enough, I was looking into sponsoring another community, and they actually used that in their pitch to me and said, hey, by the way, Chili Piper's been mentioned 53 times the past quarter. That definitely got my attention. So I think community keyword searching and doing some individual interviewing, Danny, of your ICP and saying what communities they hang out in should help you quite a bit.
Mark asks, in this was a little earlier in our discussion. So they come in from inbound after a referral on social, and to include a point to ask the prospect, how do you hear about this? How did you hear about us? So I think that's going to the attribution piece.
Yeah, this, to clarify, Mark, this is right on the form. So as they're filling out name, email, the company they work for, right there, it says, how did you hear about us? And it's a required field. But to the second point I mentioned, this is something we do internally on Chili Piper, but we do ask the sales reps again to ask that question in case maybe they didn't write it or it wasn't very clear. And we make that as part of a required field in order for them to move an opportunity to the next stage of what prompted that demo request. So I hope that those two pieces covered your question, Mark.
Christina says it's not a question, in as much that she just says that she's really loving this convo. Some of the most impactful marketing and sales plays nowadays are things that traditionally would be shrugged off by execs because they wouldn't scale. But what makes them really stand out and memorable is when everyone's doing the same thing. So I think one of those things that, into a point that we were talking about earlier, is that brands have, in my opinion, a huge first mover advantage right now in dark social. It is, I think, I firmly believe that this will be the thing 10 years from now that social media was 10 years ago, right? That this will be standard practice 10 years from now, 5 years from now. You will have a role as head of dark social, or, there will be a dark social team, or however that looks like. I do still think it's first mover advantage. And I think the same brands are showing up actively, the same sponsors, the same folks that know each other. And I don't think that that's just because they're the ones that are spending money per se. It's that they're seeing the power of it.
Yeah.
Dylan asks, says he works at, and I have an opinion on this, but certainly want yours. He says, I work at a very well-funded unicorn with 1,400 employees. How do I help other employees build the brand by creating a personal brand on LinkedIn and other social channels? And have we seen other companies create programs that enable employees to act as subject matter experts because they have a killer product, good traction, and are well poised? What they don't have is a strong brand, even though they have 30,000 customers. So it's really the personal brand kind of question. If I'm taking away that, how do you help employees build that personal brand and then leverage it?
I think, Dylan, I might take a different approach to your question, because reading it here, saying you're well-funded, you have 30,000 clients, but you're trying to get your employees to act as subject matter experts. I don't know if you were here earlier, but I think this is a big gap that we have in sales and marketing, in that often we're not subject matter experts. A lot of the time I feel like I'm kind of acting as if, but I don't feel like I'm a subject matter expert. But maybe that's, I don't know, sharing your journey there. So I'm wondering if you're actually maybe taking a wrong approach and trying to get employees that aren't really subject matter experts and trying to get them to become, when they actually can't rely on their subject matter expertise. Reading your question, if you have 30,000 clients, I'd like reverse engineer and look for some of those customers that are having some awesome wins, and seeing if you can actually curate their stories so that then your reps can share amongst social media. I think if you have a small subset of customers that they're truly the subject matter experts and you're creating content with them it'll actually help bridge the gap for your sales and marketing folks to understand the problems that they're solving, which could then in turn motivate them more to want to speak out on behalf. But I think you're looking at this maybe in a different way of, rather than trying to turn your 1,400 employees into content creators and subject matter experts, I'd maybe go for the top and try and actually hire a subject matter expert, maybe have them create a bunch of content that then your sales and marketing people can kind of redistribute or post or reformat. But that's probably the approach I would take. I think if it's not coming top down, it's very tough to really get everybody rowing in the right direction. So for us, it was easier because it was coming top down. And over time, what we found was we were even recruiting the right types of candidates that wanted to lean in. I think it's a very upward battle if you're trying to create, let's say, 1,400 people that aren't really wanting to lean into it, haven't been given a top-down direction, and haven't necessarily seen it work from customers and seeing their wins. I think you're fighting a very tough battle.
And I'd agree. I know we're almost up on time, and to be respectful of everyone's time, including yours, Arthur. You know, one of the things you never want to see a brand do, and I'm not at all suggesting this, Dylan, with yours, is to force employees, and you kind of talked about this with your kind of tiers of social content, right? Kind of providing the template that they can use. We do the same. You know, they can either take that exactly, they can take it and slightly change it, or they can turn it into their own. A lot of companies try to force their employees to just be speakerphones for them, or just copy paste and that. So if you were to follow employees in a thread, say on Twitter, literally all you'd see is the same exact thing repeated because there's no change in the content, right? Whereas if you let that go out into the wild, you enable employees, you give them access to all that information, right? Like we have an employee advocacy tool. So here's everything. You take what you want, how you want it. You can copy and paste, but you can take it and make it your own. So I think that's one area you mentioned. But then also letting those, being supportive of people developing their personal brands, providing training, right? Like, here's the guardrails. I've done this at other companies. Here's just the ways to not screw it up. Otherwise, you're good, right? You're empowered. You can't do this. Anything on this side of it, you'll create issues for the brand or for yourself. And then you see those people develop their own voice, because you can't force that voice on people, right? Like, and then they actually become advocates of the brand because it's not forced on them, right? And they do it organically. So that would be kind of my last piece on it. I'm getting the ticker that says this is going to end on us in 10 seconds. So thank you, Arthur, for taking time to join us.
Yeah, this has been great. Loved the conversation, Justin. So hopefully people got something out of it.
Awesome. Thank you.